He said I wouldn't last a day in the real world. I'd already lasted 6 days in a Syrian black site coordinating asset recovery. The real world, according to my brother in law Marcus, smelled of lemon polish and over roasted turkey. It was a world of beige walls, of perfectly creased trousers, and of conversations that circled the same predictable topics: interest rates, the HOA's new landscaping rules, and the outrageous cost of sending his son, Bradley, to a summer camp that taught coding through interpretive dance. My sister Sarah seemed to float through this world in a haze of placid contentment, her smile as fixed and decorative as the ceramic cornucopia in the center of the dining table. This was their reality, a carefully constructed diorama of suburban success, hermetically sealed against the grit and chaos of genuine existence. For them, I was a broken piece, a figure that didn't fit the scene. Helen Weston, 50 years old, perpetually single, living in a small rented house on the other side of town, driving a 10-year-old Ford F-150 that was more rust than paint. The woman who wore thrift store flannel to Thanksgiving dinner and had, in Marcus's frequent and booming proclamations, never had a real job. He was holding court now, a glass of expensive red wine swirling in his hand, the ruby liquid catching the light from the chandelier above. His voice, honed by years of corporate litigation, filled every corner of the room, leaving no space for dissent or, God forbid, silence. "It's about ambition, you see," he declared, his gaze sweeping over his two children, who were staring blankly at their phones, and then landing, as it always did, on me. "You have to want more. You have to build something, a career, a portfolio, a legacy." He took a theatrical sip of his wine. "Take my firm? We just closed the Henderson merger, a 9-figure deal. That's tangible. That's reality." I focused on the rhythmic motion of my fork against the porcelain plate, scraping a small dam in my mashed potatoes to hold back the gravy. The metallic scrape was a familiar sound, a small grounding anchor in the sea of his self-congratulation. In his world, value was measured in dollars and titles printed on thick cardstock. It was a language I understood academically, the way a linguist understands a dead tongue. I could parse its grammar, but I could not speak it. It held no meaning for me. "Helen, you should listen to this," Sarah chimed in, her voice gentle but laced with the familiar edge of pity. "Marcus has some excellent contacts. Maybe it's time to think about settling down, finding a path." A path? They saw my life as a directionless wandering. They couldn't see the tracks I'd laid, the ones that ran through the dust of Kandahar, the alleys of Beirut, the sterile corridors of Langley. They couldn't comprehend a world where a portfolio was a collection of human assets, not stocks, and where legacy was measured by the disasters that didn't happen, the names that never made the news. My chest felt tight, the recycled air of their climate-controlled home suddenly too thin. The feeling transported me just for a second. The cold, damp stone of a forgotten cellar, the taste of copper and dust in my mouth, the low hum of a generator, the only sound for 3 days. I blinked, and the cellar dissolved back into the polished mahogany of Marcus's dining room. The memory was from 20 years ago, a training exercise at the farm designed to break us. It hadn't. It had forged us. It had taught me the value of silence, of enduring, of becoming smaller than the space you occupy until it's time to act. It was the first and most important lesson. The real battles are fought in the quiet. Marcus, of course, had never known a moment of quiet in his life. He mistook volume for authority. "I mean, what do you even do all day?" he pressed on, a smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying this, performing for his captive audience. "Volunteer work is admirable, Helen, truly, but it doesn't pay the bills. It's not a career, it's a hobby." My volunteer work, as he called it, was the cover I'd maintained for over 2 decades. a vague, shifting story about freelance research, charity consulting, helping out at the local library. It was thin, designed to be uninteresting, to deflect questions. For most people, it worked. For Marcus, it was a red flag, an infuriating void in his spreadsheet of a world. He couldn't categorize me, so he dismissed me. This dynamic hadn't been born today, it was cemented years ago at another family dinner not long after I'd left my doctoral program in geopolitics. I had been recruited quietly, pulled aside by a professor with deep ties to the intelligence community. He'd seen something in me, a mind that saw patterns, a temperament that didn't flinch. The offer was a door to a different world, one I'd only read about in classified histories. To accept, I had to vanish. I remember the dinner. It was Sarah and Marcus's first anniversary. I'd just told the family I was dropping out of my PhD program to travel and find myself. The words felt like ash in my mouth. Marcus had leaned back in his chair, the same arrogant posture, the same condescending smirk already forming. He was younger then, thinner, but the essence of him was fully formed. Find yourself? Helen, that's what aimless teenagers do with their parents' money. You're throwing away a prestigious opportunity. For what? A backpack and a hostel in Europe? It's just not the right path for me anymore, I'd said, my voice barely a whisper. I was looking at my father, a retired engineer who believed in blueprints and solid foundations. I saw the disappointment in his eyes, a slight, almost imperceptible narrowing. He didn't understand. The right path? Marcus scoffed, laughing as he speared a piece of steak. The right path is the one that leads to a corner office and a six-figure salary. Everything else is a detour into failure. You'll be back in a year asking for a loan, mark my words. My father hadn't defended me. My mother had wrung her hands and talked about finding a nice young man. Sarah had looked at her new husband with pure adoration, his pronouncements already gospel. In that moment, I was utterly alone. The rejection was a clean, sharp wound. It didn't fester. It cauterized. It taught me that my new world required a complete separation from the old one. My silence wasn't just about national security. It was a shield I had forged in the fire of their judgment. I learned to live between the lines. I became an expert in the art of being forgettable. My clothes were bland, my car was unremarkable, my stories were boring. I paid my bills on time from a trust my grandfather had left me, just enough to sustain a simple life and avoid the indignity of ever having to ask Marcus for a single dollar. His prediction of my failure became a silent, motivating force. I would never, ever give him the satisfaction. Over the years, my life split into two distinct channels. In one, I was Aunt Helen, the quiet spinster, the family failure, the object of pity and condescension. In the other, I was Helios, a name spoken in hushed tones in secure rooms, a case officer who ran networks in the world's most dangerous places. I had briefed generals, advised ambassadors, and made decisions that shifted the geopolitical landscape in small but significant ways. I had held the hand of a dying asset in a dusty alley in Karachi, the warmth leaving his body as he passed me one last piece of intelligence. I had survived an ambush in the Bekaa Valley, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of incoming mortar fire, a sound I could still conjure at will. I had negotiated with warlords, outsmarted Russian SVR agents, and spent 6 days in a Syrian intelligence dungeon playing the part of a terrified, lost tourist while mentally mapping the facility and coordinating my own extraction through a series of coded taps on a water pipe. Marcus thought a hashtag was a strategy. He believed a strongly worded legal brief could change the world. His battles were fought on paper, his victories celebrated with champagne. My victories were marked by the quiet hum of a transport plane lifting off a covert airstrip, another asset safe, another crisis averted. My victories were silent, anonymous, and absolute. You know, Marcus said, pulling me from my reverie. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table, a posture of mock intimacy. Bradley's teacher gave everyone in his class a participation trophy for their science fair, a trophy for just showing up. That's the problem with your generation, Helen. No offense. You all think you deserve a prize for just existing. My generation, I was 2 years older than him. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. You never finished anything, he continued, his voice dropping to a tone of feigned concern. That PhD program, that time you said you were learning photography, it's a pattern of, well, of not committing, of not having the grit to see something through. The real world rewards finishers, Helen. It has no place for people who just drift. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Not anger, not anymore. It was a kind of weary resignation mixed with a detached clinical curiosity. I wondered what he would do if I told him. Not the details, of course, but the truth. The simple, unadorned truth. I didn't finish my PhD, Marcus, because I was recruited by the Defense Intelligence Agency. My photography hobby was cover for learning surveillance techniques in hostile urban environments. And I don't drift, I am deployed. But I said nothing. The silence doctrine. You never explain, you never defend, you do the work. The work is its own justification. Explaining it to him would be like describing color to a man born blind. He lacked the fundamental capacity to understand. His world was too small, too bright, too loud. I'm content, I said, the words simple and plain. It was the only defense I ever offered, and it was the one that infuriated him the most. Content! He barked a laugh. Contentment is a consolation prize for those who can't achieve success. It's settling, it's giving up. He pointed his fork at me. You've given up, Helen. And honestly, it's sad to watch. My sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze flitting between us. Marcus, please, it's Thanksgiving. No, Sarah, this is important, he insisted, waving her concern away. I'm saying this because I care. This family is built on success. My success, our father's success as an engineer, your success as a mother. We are all contributors. Helen needs to understand that there's a cost to not contributing. People lose respect for you. He let that hang in the air. People lose respect for you. The unspoken part was, I have no respect for you. I met his gaze across the table. My own eyes felt flat, impassive. I had been interrogated by men who were masters of psychological warfare, men who could peel a man's soul apart with questions and silence. Marcus was an amateur, a bully with a thesaurus. His words were clumsy, blunt instruments. They couldn't touch me, not anymore. I picked up my water glass, the condensation cool against my fingertips. The ice clinked. The sound was sharp in the sudden quiet. I took a slow sip. My pulse was steady. My breathing was even. In a high-stress situation, the first thing to control is yourself. Baseline biometrics. Stay calm, observe, assess. My target profile on Marcus was complete. Ego-driven, requires external validation. Motivated by perceived status, insecure, weaponizes conventional metrics of success to diminish others. Conclusion, not a threat, an obstacle, a nuisance. Before I could set my glass down, the doorbell chimed. The sound cut through the tension like a scalpel. Everyone froze. Sarah looked toward the front hall, a confused frown on her face. Are we expecting someone else? Probably just the Henderson kid selling wrapping paper again. Marcus grumbled, annoyed at the interruption to his sermon. Bradley, go tell him we're not interested. But Bradley didn't move. We all heard it. The sound of a heavy professional knock on the door. 3 sharp raps, not a social call. Knock, knock, knock. It was a sound I knew well. It was the sound of my other world intruding upon this one. A cold dread, mingled with a strange sense of relief, washed over me. My hand instinctively went to the inside of my flannel jacket. my fingers brushing against the smooth, cool plastic of the slim folder tucked into an interior pocket. My go bag was in the trunk of the Ford. It was always there, packed, ready. Sarah got up and walked to the door. We heard the lock turn, the squeak of the hinges. Her voice was hesitant. "Can I help you?" A man's voice responded. It was deep, calm, and resonant with an authority that was innate, not performed. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm looking for Helen Weston." A silence fell over the dining room. Marcus's smirk froze on his face. He looked at me, an expression of pure disbelief dawning in his eyes. Who would be looking for me? The librarian? A fellow volunteer from the soup kitchen? Sarah reappeared in the doorway, her face pale. Behind her stood a man who did not belong in this house. He was tall and lean, with short cropped gray hair and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was wearing Army combat uniforms, the digital camouflage pattern a stark, alien intrusion against the floral wallpaper of the foyer. On his chest were rows of ribbons, a constellation of valor and service that told a story of a life lived at the sharp end of history. His rank, pinned to his collar, was the silver eagle of a full colonel. He held his beret respectfully in his hand. He stepped into the room, his boots making no sound on the thick carpet. His eyes scanned the occupants, professional and unreadable, until they found me. A flicker of recognition, of shared understanding passed between us. I knew him, Colonel James Davis. We had worked together on a joint task force in the Horn of Africa 3 years prior. A good man, a serious man. He stood at a perfect parade rest, his posture radiating a discipline that made Marcus, even in his expensive suit, look like a slouched, soft civilian. "Ma'am," the colonel said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of command. Marcus let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Ma'am? Do you have the right house, Colonel? This is Helen Weston. She's unemployed." Colonel Davis's gaze shifted to Marcus for a fraction of a second. It was not a glare. It was a dismissal. It was the look of a lion briefly noticing a yapping dog before returning its attention to more important matters. He did not even bother to respond to the comment. He looked back at me. "Ms. Weston," he said, his tone formal and urgent. "I apologize for the intrusion. A priority message came through Langley, routed from CENTCOM. The Mosul asset is compromised." The words hung in the air, meaningless to everyone else in the room, but a gut punch to me. The Mosul asset. Caspian, a university professor with access to insurgent leadership, a brave man with a family compromised. My mind raced, sorting through contingencies, protocols, extraction plans. The dinner, Marcus, the years of quiet resentment, it all evaporated like mist. I was no longer in a suburban dining room. I was on the clock. "SecDef wants you on the next bird to Ramstein," the colonel continued. "Wheels up from Andrews in 90 minutes. I nodded slowly, my mind already working the problem. Ramstein was the staging ground. From there, it would be a quiet flight to Iraq. I needed to make 3 calls, send 2 encrypted texts, and activate the local team. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder. It was thin, beige, with a bold red border and block lettering across the top. Top secret, Arin SCI, Go Orkan Arnoforn. I slid it across the polished table toward the colonel. "My preliminary threat assessment on the Iranian network in Kirkuk. I finished it this morning. It might be relevant." Colonel Davis took the folder. He didn't need to open it. He knew what it was. He looked at me, and for the first time, his professional mask softened into something that looked almost like reverence. Marcus stared at the folder. His face had gone from ruddy to a waxy, bloodless white. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes wide with a confusion so profound it bordered on panic. He was trying to reconcile the woman he had just spent an hour belittling with the scene unfolding before him. The letters on the folder, the uniformed colonel in his dining room, the incomprehensible jargon. The pieces didn't fit. His entire world, his carefully ordered reality, was shattering. I stood up, my chair scraping quietly against the hardwood floor. I looked at my sister, whose hand was covering her mouth, her eyes filled with tears of confusion. I gave her a small, tight smile, an apology, a goodbye. Then I turned to face the colonel. He took a half step back. He snapped his heels together, his back ramrod straight. He brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. It was not the casual salute one gives a colleague. It was the formal salute a serving officer gives to a superior, or, in this case, to a civilian of equivalent or higher authority within the national security structure. A civilian he was now tasked to serve. "We're honored to have you back, ma'am," Colonel Davis said, his voice resonating with unwavering sincerity. The salute shock. It was the final devastating blow to Marcus's reality. A full-bird colonel, a man who had likely commanded battalions in combat, was saluting his unemployed, aimless sister-in-law in his own dining room. The hierarchy of his world had not just been challenged, it had been inverted, turned inside out, and utterly destroyed. He sank back into his chair, a low, guttural sound escaping his throat. He looked small, defeated, irrelevant. I didn't return the salute. I was a civilian. I simply gave a short, acknowledging nod. "Thank you, Colonel. Let's go." I walked past the dinner table, past the cooling turkey and the half-eaten plates. I didn't look at Marcus again. I didn't need to. His judgment, which had shadowed me for 2 decades, was now a meaningless whisper, a ghost I could finally leave behind. As I stepped out into the cold November night, the crisp air felt clean, real. The colonel held the door of a black, government-issue sedan open for me. As I got in, I could see the faces of my family pressed against the dining room window, pale figures in a brightly lit box, watching me disappear into a world they could never comprehend. The car pulled away from the curb, its movements smooth and silent. I leaned my head back against the seat, the tightness in my chest finally releasing. The silence in the car wasn't empty, it was focused. It was the silence of purpose, my purpose, the one I had chosen all those years ago. For 20 years, Marcus had defined me by what he thought I lacked. A husband, a mortgage, a title on a business card. He saw absence. He couldn't see that my life was not empty, but full. It was full of secrets, of sacrifices, of a quiet, unyielding commitment to something larger than myself. My silence was not a weakness, it was my armor and my greatest weapon. He had spent his life building a legacy of billable hours and stock options, a monument to himself. I had spent my life being a ghost, a silent guardian on a wall he didn't even know existed, and his world was safe enough for him to sit at a polished table and lecture me on ambition precisely because of people like me. My real world didn't smell of lemon polish. It smelled of jet fuel and cordite and the ozone tang of approaching rain in a foreign country. And tonight I was going back to it. I was going home.